in the subtle and haunting light of the setting sun, that golden light rich with nostalgia for the day that is just past, the sombre visage of the place, part manor house, part fortified farmhouse, immense, rambling, a dilapidated eagle's nest atop the crag down which its attendant village meandered, reminded him of childhood tales on winter evenings, when he and his brothers and sisters scared themselves half out of their wits with ghost stories set in just such places, and then had to have candles light them up newly terrifying stairs to bed. He could almost have regretted accepting the crone's unspoken invitation, but now, standing before the door of time-eroded oak while she selected a huge iron key from the clanking ringful at her waist, he knew it was too late to turn back, and brusquely reminded himself he was no child now, to be frightened of his own fancies. The old lady unlocked the door, which swung back on melodramatically creaking hinges, and fussily took charge of his bicycle, in spite of his protests. He felt a certain involuntary sinking of the heart to see his beautiful two-wheeled symbol of rationality vanish into the dark entrails of the mansion, to, no doubt, some damp outhouse, where they would not oil it or check its tires. But in for a penny, in for a pound. In his youth and strength and blonde beauty, in the invisible, even unacknowledged pentacle of his virginity, the young man stepped over the threshold of Nosferatu's castle, and did not shiver in the blast of cold air, as from the mouth of a grave, that emanated from the lightless, cavernous interior. The crone took him to a little chamber where there was a black oak table spread with a clean white cloth, and this cloth was carefully laid with heavy silverware, a little tarnished as if someone with foul breath had breathed on it, but laid with one place only. Curiouser and curiouser. Invited to the castle for dinner, now he must dine alone. All the same, he sat down as she had bid him. Although it was not yet dark outside, the curtains were closely drawn, and only the sparing light trickling from a single oil lamp showed him how dismal his surroundings were. The crone bustled about to get him a bottle of wine and a glass from an ancient cabinet of wormy oak. While he bemusedly drank his wine, she disappeared, but soon returned bearing a steaming platter of the local spiced meat stew with dumplings and a shank of black bread. He was hungry after his long day's ride. He ate heartily and polished his plate with the crust. But this coarse food was hardly the entertainment he'd expected from the gentry, and he was puzzled by the assessing glint in the dumb woman's eyes as she watched him eating. But she darted off to get him a second helping as soon as he'd finished the first one, and she seemed so friendly and helpful besides that he knew he could count on a bed for the night in the castle as well as his supper. So he sharply reprimanded himself for his own childish lack of enthusiasm for the eerie silence, the clammy chill of the place. When he'd put away the second plateful, the old woman came and gestured he should leave the table and follow her once again. She made a pantomime of drinking. He deduced he was now invited to take after-dinner coffee in another room with some more elevated member of the household, who had not wished to dine with him, but all the same wanted to make his acquaintance. An honor, no doubt. In deference to his host's opinion of himself, he straightened his tie, brushed the crumbs from his tweed jacket. He was surprised to find how ruinous the interior of the house was. Cobwebs, worm-eaten beams, crumbling plaster, but the mute crone resolutely wound him on the reel of her lantern down endless corridors, up winding staircases, through the galleries where the painted eyes of family portraits briefly flickered as they passed, eyes that belonged, he noticed, to faces, one and all, of quite memorable beastliness. At last she paused, and behind the door where they had halted, he heard a faint metallic twang as of perhaps a chord struck on a harpsichord. And then, wonderfully, the liquid cascade of the song of a lark, bringing to him in the heart, had he but known it, of Juliet's tomb all the freshness of morning. The crone rapped with her knuckles on the panels, the most seductively caressing voice he had ever heard in his life softly called out, in heavily accented French, the adopted language of the Eremonian aristocracy, "Entrez." First of all he only saw a shape imbued with a fanate luminosity, since it caught and reflected in its yellowed surfaces what little light there was in the ill-lit room. This shape resolved itself into that of all things, a hoop-skirted dress of white satin, draped here and there with lace, a dress 50 or 60 years out of fashion, but once obviously intended for a wedding. And then he saw the girl who wore the dress, a girl with the fragility of the skeleton of a moth, so thin, so frail that her dress seemed to him to hang suspended, as if untenanted, in the dank air, a fabulous lending, a self-articulated garment in which she lived like a ghost in a machine. All the light in the room came from a low-burning lamp with a thick greenish shade on a distant mantelpiece. The crone who accompanied him shielded her lantern with her hand, as if to protect her mistress from too suddenly seeing, or their guest from too suddenly seeing her. So that it was, little by little, as his eyes grew accustomed to the half-dark, that he saw how beautiful and how very young the bedizened scarecrow was, and he thought of a child dressing up in her mother's clothes, perhaps a child putting on the clothes of a dead mother in order to bring her, however briefly, to life again. The Countess stood behind a low table, beside a pretty, silly, gilt-and-wire birdcage, hands outstretched in a distracted attitude that was almost one of flight. She looked as startled by their entry as if she had not requested it. With her stark white face, her lovely death's head surrounded by long dark hair that fell down as straight as if it were soaking wet, she looked like a shipwrecked bride. Her huge dark eyes almost broke his heart with their waif-like lost look. Yet he was disturbed, almost repelled by her extraordinarily fleshy mouth, a mouth with wide, full, prominent lips of a vibrant purplish crimson, a morbid mouth. Even, but he put the thought away from him immediately, a whore's mouth. She shivered all the time, a starveling chill, a malarial agitation of the bones. He thought she must be only 16 or 17 years old, no more, with the hectic, unhealthy beauty of a consumptive. She was the chatelaine of this decay. With many tender precautions, the crone now raised the light she held to show his hostess her guest's face. At that the Countess let out a faint, meowing cry and made a blind, appalled gesture with her hands, as if pushing him away, so that she knocked against the table, and a butterfly dazzle of painted cards fell to the floor. Her mouth formed a round O of woe. She swayed a little and then sank into her chair, where she lay as if now scarcely capable of moving. A bewildering reception. Tisking under her breath, the crone busily poked about on the table until she found an enormous pair of dark green glasses, such as blind beggars wear, and perched them on the Countess's nose. He went forward to pick up her cards for her from a carpet that, he saw to his surprise, was part rotted away, partly encroached upon by all kinds of virulent-looking fungi. He retrieved the cards and shuffled them carelessly together, for they meant nothing to him, though they seemed strange playthings for a young girl. What a grisly picture of a capering skeleton! He covered it up with a happier one, of two young lovers smiling at one another, and put her toys back into a hand so slender you could almost see the frail net of bone beneath the translucent skin, a hand with fingernails as long, as finely pointed, as banjo picks. At his touch she seemed to revive a little, and almost smiled, raising herself upright. "Coffee," she said. "You must have coffee," and scooped up her cards into a pile so that the crone could set before her a silver spirit kettle, a silver coffee pot, cream jug, sugar basin, cups ready on a silver tray, a strange touch of elegance, even if discoloured, in this devastated interior, whose mistress ethereally shone as if with her own blighted submarine radiance.